Hello, film fans. Welcome to All the Film Things. I'm your host, Elizabeth. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, leave a review or a rating. Also, check out the All the Film Things Instagram for updates and more film things. Today, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the masterpiece that is Chinatown, starring Jack Nicholson, Faye Dunaway, and John Huston. Joining me to discuss this 1974 film is film historian, author, and lecturer Max Alvarez. Listeners of the All the Film Things podcast may remember Max from the first wide-release episode of this show. Max has two upcoming online lectures, also known as talkbacks, with the New York City-based theater New Plaza Cinema, one topic being the cinema of Billy Wilder, and the other on Wilder's brilliant noir film, Sunset Boulevard. Go to newplazacinema.org or the New Plaza Cinema YouTube channel to watch his past lectures. Max, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It is a pleasure to be back on All the Film Things.
I have greatly been looking forward to this discussion to talk about this film with you, and we will be talking about your upcoming lectures later in this episode. But to start us off, I wanted to read the IMDb plot summary for the film, which states, a private detective hired to expose an adulterer in 1930s Los Angeles finds himself caught up in a web of deceit, corruption, and murder. So, you recently told me that you were 14 years old when you first saw Chinatown. From the way you said that, it sounds like there's an interesting story there. So, I have to know, what was your first time experience with Chinatown like?
It was when I was 14 years old. They were screening it at several cinemas in Milwaukee, and my parents and I went to the greatly lamented Capitol Court Cinema, a beautiful single-screen house run by the Stanley Warner chain. And I just remember approaching the theater, and it was the old-fashioned plastic marquee letters. It was on one side in black letters, Jack Nicholson, and then it said Chinatown, and on the right side was Faye Dunaway. It was real old school showmanship. And I just remember seeing it on that magnificent giant Panavision screen and the power and the impact of the film. And it was one of those pictures that you knew instantly was a masterpiece and would be talked about for years to come. And as maybe you and I may have discussed earlier, we were taking for granted the quality of a film like Chinatown because we expected films of that quality in 1974, as you know, a very famous film year. Mm-hmm. But it was an experience I didn't forget and went back to see it several times when it started playing the neighborhood cinemas. And there were some other later showings of the film that I went to that I'll be sharing some stories about that as well.
Did you understand the film at that age?
I did.
Wow.
I had been corrupted at a young age by my parents because we were always going to see international cinema, foreign language films, classic films. So certainly a few things went over my head, I am sure. But yes, I understood the darkness of it and the disturbing themes in the film.
I watched the film for the first time when I was 17, and I have since seen it 4 times. Though preparing for this episode, I do feel like I better understand the film. Just the other day, I realized I'm not the only one feeling confused by the film, so I feel validated in my confusion after all this time. I'm incredibly impressed that you understood the film at 14.
Well,
it's amazing.
Now, in fairness to you, yes, it's convoluted as we expect these kinds of films to be. And obviously, the one we often cite is Howard Hawks's The Big Sleep, which is famous for its confusing narrative. You expect these kinds of detective thrillers to feature lots of different characters with different backstories. And there comes a point where you're trying to figure out who is doing what to whom. So yes, if you quizzed me on the spot at the time and gave me a test on Chinatown, I would have been scratching my head and saying, well, gee, now remind me again, which character are you talking about? Of course, those films are designed to cause us to question the narrative. But when I say I understood it, I understood the darker themes that the film raises.
Right. Do you think that since the main character of the film, Jake Gittes, is confused throughout the film, even saying about Chinatown itself, you can't always tell what's going on, that the audience is meant to feel the confusion as well?
The audience is definitely meant to be sympathetic with J.J. Gittes, and he is our entry into this netherworld of corruption and violence and intrigue. We are intended to be confused. We are intended to be disoriented. He is our only way of trying to get to the source of what the mystery is about. And I guess that kind of genre lends itself to that. And not only movies like The Big Sleep, but obviously films like Kiss Me Deadly also are designed to draw us in through the central character. That character, whether they're a private eye, are supposed to be sorting out the confusing data for us.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the noirs of old Hollywood. This film is considered neo-noir, but from my understanding, neo-noir is basically a color noir film.
Neo-noir can also be, that's partially true, but neo-noir we associate with crime pictures made from the early 60s onward. There's a big disagreement as to when film noir wound down. I know Eddie Muller says around 1959, 1960, but we talk about crime pictures made from the early 60s onward as being neo-noir, and they can be black and white. They don't have to be color. But Chinatown clearly was referencing this earlier genre of picture. In his memoir, Roman Polanski indicated that the studio initially wanted him to shoot it in black and white because that was a trend briefly at the time in the early 70s, and Paper Moon had been a huge success. But he didn't want a retro look. He wanted it to have a quote-unquote modern look. He wanted color and Panavision to give it a contemporary look to a classic setting. So that all falls into the neo-noir agenda.
Did Chinatown bring back the noir genre if the genre had faded in popularity by the early 60s?
It was not there. Let's just say there wasn't an onslaught of these kinds of pictures. The following year, there was kind of a poor man's Chinatown. There was Farewell, My Lovely with Robert Mitchum, which is certainly watchable, but not quite in the class of Chinatown. It coincided with changing industry taste. The industry was gradually getting away from some of the more nostalgic looks at filmmaking, the recreations of the 1930s and 40s films, of which Chinatown is part of. Even though it was a successful picture, as we all know, it was coinciding with the decline in the so-called New Hollywood movement. So they were already getting away from a certain kind of film, moving more towards the blockbuster era type films.
Yeah, and that switch is evident in the Academy Awards, which is one of my topics for today. And I already know you are not so happy with, I'm sure, one of the big winners. I was looking at which films would beat Chinatown in a few of these categories, and one of them absolutely shocks me, but we'll get into that later.
Sounds good.
So how would you say Chinatown resembles the classic film noirs versus how does it depart from those noirs?
It resembles the classic film noirs, although I do have to preface this by saying we associate a film noir usually being about a private investigator or a private detective who is hired by a beautiful woman to solve some kind of a mystery. That's actually not a very common theme in film noir. There are very few films that follow that template. However, Chinatown does owe its origins to films like The Maltese Falcon, for example, to the writings of Dashiell Hammett. But where it clearly deviates from these films that were made in the 40s and the 50s is, first of all, its lack of censorship restrictions. It can be more explicit with violence. It can show nudity. And it would fight the trend of having a very happy, upbeat, or an ending where the matter is resolved. The irony here is that when Chinatown was written in screenplay form, Robert Towne had actually been planning a more upbeat resolution. And our listeners, of course, will understand we're going to have some plot spoilers here today, so they will want to see Chinatown. But it was Robert Towne's intention that J.J. Gittes, the Jack Nicholson character, and Evelyn Mulwray, the Faye Dunaway character, get away safely at the end and leave Los Angeles, or they escape with their lives intact and her life intact. And that Polanski felt that there had to be something darker. There had to be anger on the part of the audience at the injustice taking place in the story. And he felt that the way for that was for the Evelyn Mulwray character to die. And that was one of the biggest arguments that Polanski and Towne had when Polanski came in to rework the script with Robert Towne, what was a very, very tense collaboration. And by the way, we now are discovering through the research of Sam Wasson in his book, The Big Goodbye, about the making of Chinatown, Chinatown in the last years of Hollywood, that there was an uncredited writer who worked with Towne on Chinatown by the name of Edward Taylor. Even Polanski didn't know Taylor was involved. The two of them never met. But Taylor was behind the scenes as Towne was working out the major plot points, eventually with Polanski. But Chinatown went into a much darker zone that made it stand out from other film noir. Polanski's biographer, Barbara Leeming, when she wrote about Polanski decades ago, said that she viewed Chinatown as Polanski's, forgive me for not quoting directly, he was almost not satirizing, but he was challenging the conventions of noir by not offering a simple resolution, an upbeat resolution.
Well, 70s New Hollywood endings tend to be more real, and they don't always give you that happy ending that the censorships always that was the rule, basically. If someone was committing a crime, there was a punishment for those crimes. And do you think that the desire to have a happier ending with Jake and Evelyn getting away at the end, leaving LA, is indicative of the switch of New Hollywood to the blockbuster era?
Well, and that's a little complicated to answer because the script would have been written in the early 70s when the New Hollywood era was on the ascent. And Robert Towne, in his other scripts that he worked on, certainly was accustomed to the downbeat endings. But it does, in a way, foreshadow the changing in marketplace conditions. Maybe Towne had an idea that things were going to be changing. There was a fascinating documentary report done by Tom Anderson, that's Thom, called Los Angeles Plays Itself, about movies filmed in Los Angeles. And Anderson was very critical of how LA was portrayed in the movies. He had a fascinating section on Chinatown, and he was actually critical of the downbeat conclusion because he felt that the film was saying the system is so repressive and so powerful that why even bother trying to fight it? Now, I'm not quoting directly, but he felt there was a defeatist attitude in Chinatown towards the end, which I find quite interesting. Because the also thing about the ending, which you probably know already, was that Robert Towne's original screenplay, there was never a scene in Chinatown.
Right.
Chinatown was a metaphor, between you and I, a rather pretentious metaphor, where it was mentioned in discussion, but we never saw it, you know. And Polanski and others said, look, we need a scene in Chinatown. And once again, I believe it was according to the Leeming biography, Polanski was the one who wrote that final scene in Chinatown very close to when they filmed it. I want to say the night before, but certainly very close to when they filmed it. And Towne was not happy about that ending.
Wow. That amazing ending with the culmination of so many things was written the night before.
That's
or very
amazing.
Close to it.
Wow. I did not know that. I had heard about the alternative ending, but I had not heard about how that part came together much later. That's really impressive.
And I have not read the initial drafts of the script that Towne wrote before Polanski came on board. There was a highly unreadable book in 1991 written by a druggy former producer named Julia Phillips called You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again, in which she referenced an early draft of the Chinatown script in which apparently after Jake and Evelyn get away, there was supposed to be a series of dissolves showing the very lush San Fernando Valley of groves and wilderness slowly dissolving into the smog-drenched ugliness of the early 1970s. That's what Towne was intending, but Polanski was less literal than that.
Rewatching Chinatown, I realized even though the film is very much a noir, neo-noir, that the film has a paranoid thriller feel to it. Paranoid thrillers were a popular genre in the 70s. Would you say Chinatown falls under the paranoid thriller genre as well as noir?
Absolutely. It certainly cannot escape the political atmosphere of the time of paranoia. By coincidence, it came out within a few months of Richard Nixon resigning as president of the United States and the Watergate hearings and the Watergate scandal and the political disillusionment involving the Vietnam War and all the political tensions at the time. It definitely picked up on that. And there was definitely a 70s political pessimism in the film, even though it takes place in 1937. I can share with you when I saw the film 9 years after it came out. It was at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And who was brought up on stage afterwards to discuss the film? Robert Towne.
Oh, wow.
That was interesting. It was not a very enjoyable interview. He was still a little cranky about how the film turned out. And I remember, I think I asked him from the crowd, could you give us some examples of changes that were made to your script? And he was very vague, but there were a couple of moments where he referenced elements that he was not happy with when we see this affair that takes place between Evelyn and Jake. It was supposed to happen, but he didn't like the bedroom dialogue when Gittes is talking about being a policeman. Apparently, Robert Towne hated the line, "I'll bet you look cute in blue." He was hoping that you'd see them maybe the next day or after the experience of their being in bed by Gittes remarking to her, "I hope it was something I said," But he didn't go into as much detail as I would have hoped. Now, Towne sort of adjusted his views in future years. He then started to show more appreciation of what Polanski did and what Polanski brought to the project. I think maybe after the failure of The Two Jakes, the follow-up that Jack Nicholson directed that was not in Chinatown's class, maybe Towne began to appreciate Polanski's contributions more.
You're glitching a little bit.
I'm what a little bit?
You're glitching a little bit.
I'm glitching a little bit.
Yes.
Do I need to restate anything?
I think you got everything. Just some of it sounds a little bit glitchy, and I'm not sure.
So sorry.
That's okay. I don't know what that could be, but it should be okay. You sound good now. So.
Okay. If it's a problem again, just tell me and I'll redo it.
Okay. So, Chinatown was released under Paramount Pictures in 1974 when Robert Evans was at the head of the company. Why is Robert Evans' prominent role at Paramount during the making of the film significant?
Robert Evans set up a production company at the time he was still head of production at Paramount Pictures. And there were those in the industry that were very annoyed that this production executive was also a producer who could pretty much greenlight his own pictures at a studio. So this was more of a pet project for Evans, and I believe it was the first to come out of his production company. And then he will leave that job the following year to then produce exclusively for his production company. So this was a picture that he helped develop, and it was definitely more of a hands-on production than others were that he was greenlighting at Paramount.
And Chinatown was directed by Roman Polanski, which someone, unfortunately, I don't remember who, once told me is the, quote, the worst part about this film due to his extreme controversies. But he hadn't made a film in LA since Rosemary's Baby, which was released several years earlier. Did the murder of his then wife, Sharon Tate, have anything to do with this LA filming hiatus?
Yes. He had the terrible, terrible murder of Sharon Tate and their unborn child and friends in 1969 was understandably devastating for Polanski. He had developed a friendship with Stanley Kubrick at the time, and Kubrick suggested that Polanski take a break. So Polanski left the United States. He did, 2 years after the murder, make his brilliant but bloody version of Macbeth. And then he made another film in Europe, Film What, which was a surrealistic comedy. Chinatown was his first Hollywood picture since the whole tragedy occurred. And really, it would be his last Hollywood film before he had to flee the country in the late 70s following that other scandal. So being back in LA was obviously a very uncomfortable thing for Polanski. He referred to there was tragedy at every corner. Every corner of the city reminded him of something tragic. And I think that's reflective in the film. There is a gloominess that hangs over the proceedings in Chinatown. That certainly must be a variation of some of the themes that Polanski had been dealing with in his own private life.
I didn't realize how severely he was impacted by that. I've heard about the murders, and you're not a fan of this film, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that's a plot point. And I never really heard about how Roman Polanski reacted to that, but it's even more devastating than I expected.
It was a tragedy that you could only associate with someone like Roman Polanski, who had survived the Holocaust, and he had witnessed so many horrible things during World War II. That here he comes to California to start over again, and then this happens. So it seemed to be a narrative of tragedy in Polanski's life.
I didn't know he survived the Holocaust as well. That's...
Yes, which makes his film The Pianist even more troubling because it's made by somebody who was there, who did survive the Warsaw Ghetto. So there's an element to all of his films of darkness that betrays a man who has seen too much in too short a time. I mean, he was only around 40 when Chinatown went into production, but already he had experienced a lifetime of tragic experiences that, of course, are going to result in some brilliant, brilliant work. But the Manson killings certainly were devastating for Polanski. And one of his detractors, the film critic Pauline Kael of The New Yorker, when she made some comments about Chinatown the year it came out, she referred to the scene where Polanski has his cameo at the waterworks, the Department of Water and Power location, and he slashes Nicholson with a knife. Kael was saying, Polanski obviously wanted us to recall the murder of his wife with a knife by using the knife in that scene. And that may be a cruel oversimplification, but there's a shadow of tragedy that definitely has some of its roots in the events of 1969, I think.
That reminds me of something I read about in the film about the Albacore Club and how the question was asked whether they accept people of the Jewish persuasion. And I never really understood that. I still don't fully understand why that was a talking point. That was a question to be asked.
Yes, it's one of the lighter moments in the film.
Lighter?
Yes, that's actually some comic relief because it's dark comic relief, Polanski style, because in the United States, it was not uncommon for very affluent clubs to deny admission and entry not only to Blacks and people of ethnic groups, but to Jews. That was to be expected that Jews would not be allowed in. And so that scene at the club where J.J. Gittes is talking, he's pretending to be there on behalf of his father and asks the man, do you accept members of the Jewish persuasion? It was a joke on Polanski's part, Polanski being Jewish, but it's also a darkly comic reference to the bigotry that occurred in affluent clubs in 1937.
I see. And I learned this from IMDb. I'll quote them. When J.J. Gittes asks Mr. Palmer, director of the Mar Vista Rest Home, whether they, quote, accept people of the Jewish persuasion, and is assured that they do not. There is a mirror in the next room over the left shoulder of Evelyn Mulwray in the shape of an inverted pentagram, considered by some to be a symbol of evil.
That's brilliant. I haven't heard that. I like it.
So you were talking about Robert Towne and how you got to hear him talk about the film, which is amazing. I love that story. And he won the Oscar for writing the screenplay for Chinatown. Many regard this script as the greatest screenplay ever written. Would you agree with that statement?
I never use the word greatest unless I absolutely have to. I think in order to determine whether something is the greatest screenplay ever written, you literally have to have read every single screenplay ever written. Going back to the invention of cinema, no one has ever done that. It's certainly one of the most outstanding examples of narrative construction in a post-studio system era film. It's certainly a story and a screenplay worthy of study. It certainly is, it belongs in a category of some of the finest film writing done in Hollywood, without question. But I never use the word greatest.
Okay. I've heard about a few of the additional scenes that were cut in the original ending of the film, as we were just talking about. How did Towne's script evolve into the film that we see today? And do you have a preference between the original screenplay of the film or the film itself? And I know you mentioned how you haven't read the screenplay, but from what you know of the screenplay, do you have a preference?
Well, once again, I would have to have read the initial drafts by Robert Towne to determine what the ultimate outcome was. I think that the tone that the film took was the right one for the material. I do think a happy ending would have been dishonest in a way, considering all the dark themes that are being discussed here, from incest to municipal corruption to police corruption and so on. I think the decisions Polanski made sense for this kind of a narrative. I think that a lot of times when you write a screenplay, a writer will come up with what they consider to be brilliant cinematic ideas, but a director can take a look at a script and say, you know what, I can do with one camera angle what you're doing here in 5 pages. And I think that's where a lot of the fighting takes place between writers and directors. So from what I understand, Robert Towne and Edward Taylor were writing this thing by themselves. Robert Evans became part of the project, heard about the project through Towne, decided he wanted to develop it into a feature. Then Polanski was brought in, and Polanski said, look, I need to take over this. This script needs work. And that he and Robert Towne then met at Towne's home to hammer out and hammer each other on the subsequent and final drafts of the script.
Interesting. And there are moments, I mean, the film is very much a show, don't tell. I think that's part of the challenge of the film. What makes it more confusing is that you really have to pay attention and understand it for yourself. It doesn't give you all the answers, but there are moments of explanation, like when Jake explains to Evelyn after meeting for lunch what he's found out, which makes her intrigued, and when they're driving with the sunset in the background, which is a beautiful shot. I love the coloring and the look of that shot. And it helps in these conversations, as well as when Jake brings Escobar and company to where he was following Mulwray, helps the audience understand the situation, which helps those who were confused by the film. And you are exempt from that. It's amazing.
Well, not exactly, because once again, I benefited from multiple viewings. You do need to see it several times, because you're always going to miss certain things about it. But what is nice about Chinatown is it's not dialogue intensive. If you don't have scenes where people are talking for pages and pages and pages explaining the plot to us. Yes, you mentioned some scenes where some things are talked about, but it doesn't seem like that uncomfortable additive to a screenplay that we now call exposition, where they're explaining things to the audience, where we sometimes do see that in crime pictures, but not so much in Chinatown. When they do explain something, it is very condensed. I think you pointed that out well.
Oh, thank you. You are glitching a little bit more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know what. Like, there's some words that I'm following. It's just some words I'm missing, and I'm just inferring. But you just said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I heard that fine." So it's going in and out. It's strange.
Because I can repeat anything you need me to.
No, I think I just interrupted something you were about to say. So please continue.
No, I was just going to add, what I really loved about Chinatown was the fact that it doesn't open with a title that says Los Angeles 1937. It trusts the audience to figure out when the action takes place in the year. The only way you know it's 1937, well, the fashions, of course, but you have newspaper headlines. If you squint, you can see the year on the front page. You have, in one scene, a car that pulls up, and if you look at the license plate, it says 37. And then early on, when J.J. Gittes is getting a shave in a barber shop, and he gets to an argument with one of the other patrons, through the window, and this was filmed on the Paramount in New York backlot street, there's a cinema that's showing a film with Fred MacMurray called Exclusive, which is a 1937 Paramount film. So that's the only hints they're giving us. No one today has enough confidence in an audience to be so subtle.
That's a great point. I didn't catch that cinema with Fred MacMurray at screening. That's interesting.
It took me several viewings to squint and check the title of what the film was they were showing. But that's an example of not talking down to the audience. Whereas today, they don't trust anybody to know anything. So they have to tell us exactly when the story begins and so on. And it just makes it less interesting and more lazy, I think.
Yes, and this is very true that filmmakers assumed that the audience was intelligent. And there's more spoon feeding in cinema today. And that's part of why I love Christopher Nolan's work, because he already assumes the audience is intelligent. And this is actually one of his favorite films, so.
It says a lot, because what also stands out on Chinatown, and this is also true of some of the great films of that era, it respects the era in which the story takes place. It's 1937. People talk like it's 1937. They're not high-fiving each other or talking in 1970s slang. So that was expected of films made in the 70s that were set in the past. And it was true of all the Hollywood films made from the old studio era. So Chinatown was very much in that tradition of being faithful to the modes and the mores and the speech patterns of the time.
I even heard how they pronounce certain words like Los Angeles or San Pedro. Alameda was another one. Alameda was a street name. The way they said those words were very specific to the times.
Yeah, because I don't mean to interrupt you. Please continue.
Oh, I was just going to add that in the scene where Jake Gittes, after he's following Mulwray and he puts the clocks underneath the car, you can hear a song from 1937 in the background. I personally
can't hear it.
I can't get started. Okay, yeah. I forgot to write that part down, but since you had mentioned how it's so accurate to the times in the most subtle ways, I wanted to mention that, but I can't hear it. I have to look for it next time.
Because it's a brilliant example of using source music. So you have music that's playing on car radios and jukeboxes, in addition, of course, to the legendary score by Jerry Goldsmith, which I'll get to momentarily. I want to remind me to return to the music, but I wanted to add some interesting data from when Robert Towne was talking at that screening of Chinatown that I attended. He mentioned he got the original idea for Chinatown after reading a 1946 book by Carey McWilliams called Southern California, An Island on the Land, which dealt with a lot of the politics of Southern California from the beginning of the 20th century. It talked about the whole water rights battles that were taking place not in the late 30s, but much earlier in the century, in the 1900s and the 1910s. But he decided take the water rights battle theme and update it to the late 30s because he felt that it would be easier to make a film in Los Angeles set in 1937, at least at the time, than it would in the 1900s. So he took something that was inspired by events that happened on a certain level, but modernized it by bringing it up to the late 1930s. I thought that was interesting. And was also surprising is they mentioned the Department of Water and Power, which is a real municipality in LA. John Hillerman works for the DWP. And yet the movie is suggesting that the DWP is involved in killing people, right?
Right.
And years later, somebody asked somebody with the film, how did you guys get away with that? How were you able to actually film at some of those Department of Water and Power reservoirs? And the person said, well, we just told them we were making a detective movie set in the 1930s.
Wow.
And that's how they got access.
Well, it kind of reminds me about the line. Maybe this was the inspiration for it, the situation where Jake Gittes, to get access into where he finds Mulwray dead, to tell you the truth, I lied a little.
Great line.
Great line. It's one of my favorite lines from the film.
Well, since we're discussing favorite lines, mine is where he meets Noah Cross, of course, played by the great John Huston. Huston says, exactly, what do you know about me? And Gittes says, mainly that you're rich, that you're respectable, and you want your name in the newspapers. And John Huston's Noah Cross says, of course I'm respectable. I'm old. Politicians, ugly buildings, and whores all get respectable if they last long enough.
Yes.
One of the great lines.
I wonder how much truth there is to that.
That's interesting.
Exactly.
Exactly, yes. Another line I really liked from the film was when Jake tells Evelyn, you shortchanged me on the story. Because he's not talking about payment, shortchanged on the story in terms of information. I really liked that line.
Yeah, their give and take, the complexities of the relationship is, it's powerful, it's tragic, it's sensual, it's disturbing, it's really powerfully presented in a film.
And there's a parallel between two lines. The first one being, whoever is behind my husband's death, why have they gone to all this trouble? And Jake replies, money. The parallel is to, I wish I had this word for word, but basically Jake asking, what more could you want? How much better food could you eat? What more could you want being such a rich person? He says the future.
Exactly.
He takes it a step further. So
extraordinary.
That duality contrasting of those lines is it, because you would always think money, that's often the main motivator, but what crosses after is something so much more, and it's deeper, and it's going to take more time, and what he's doing is truly evil. So
yeah, and I think also to the final scene, the scene presumably that Polanski had a hand in writing, where Gittes naively says to Evelyn, let the police handle this, and she says, referring to her father, he owns the police. I mean, that's just a tremendously impactful moment.
Yes. I watched a video about how different the ending originally was to that ending, and to think of how different it was, we wouldn't have had that moment, just shocks me. That line weighs so much, and you can tell with the results, nothing happens, Cross wins, evil wins.
Yes, and that, of course, led to some of the controversies about the fatalistic tone of the film. But what's not clear, and maybe you have more information than I do on this, Elizabeth, but the editing of the film, Polanski turned in his version of the picture, and then he pretty much left for Europe to pursue other work while the film was being finalized. And during that time, the music score was changed. Now, there was a score that was written by Philippe Lambreau, which in 2012 was issued on CD under the title Los Angeles 1937. And it's a brilliant, unsettling, almost horrific score. It's almost like designed for a horror picture. And I believe a lot of the powers that be felt it was simply too horror movie type for a film like this. And so Jerry Goldsmith was brought in at literally the last minute when they were doing almost the final mix to write a new score, which apparently he did over the weekend, which is quite astonishing. And Polanski, in his memoir, expressed anger at Robert Evans, who he considered a friend, for taking a lot of the credit over how Chinatown turned out, and even taking credit for bringing Jerry Goldsmith in. But Polanski didn't elaborate any further than that. So in any event, Evans's participation was important, but when egos collide, it's never a pretty sight.
Right, absolutely. And I do remember reading about how Polanski had invited his friend, a composer, to the first screening, and he told him immediately after the film, "You got to change the score," which clearly they did.
Then that must have been the score they were referring to, was the score by Philippe Lambreau. It's a stunning score. It's absolutely stunning, and it holds up magnificently, but I could see where it would have taken the film in a whole different direction. But we have the score, and then we also have, as you mentioned, the music that makes it very effective.
Yes. Yeah, the source music is effective, and the use of source music started by the first film that catapulted New Hollywood, Easy Rider. So I always want to give a shout out to that incredible film and how that catapulted this wonderful era that we're discussing today.
Well, it's appropriate you mentioned that film, because also in his memoir, Polanski wrote that Chinatown made Jack Nicholson a star. Well, actually, Easy Rider made him a star, and then Five Easy Pieces the following year solidified his stardom. So Chinatown made him even bigger. But Polanski and Nicholson were good friends. But Polanski, there was a lot of confrontation between the two of them. Polanski seemed to have rid Nicholson of a lot of his affectations and mannerisms and mugging that is going to become his trade in the following decades, to the point where at one point when I saw Chinatown again sometime in the late 80s, I was almost disappointed by Nicholson's performance because he seemed so low key. But by that time, we were so used to his chewing up the scenery that we were used to seeing him in a more subtle performance as he gives here.
Yes, and it's a very tough topic in a way to figure out what can be regarded as Jack Nicholson's best role, best performance. Some say his performance in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as McMurphy, or Jack Torrance in The Shining, but Chinatown his performance is maybe not as forefront and loud, but I'd say it's among one of his best roles, best performances.
I would agree with you. I think you stated that very well.
Oh, thank you. So, in the film, there's a few recurring themes, motifs, I guess. I have to find the right word for that, but one being everything is not what it seems, / it's not what it looks like. And at the hearing, everyone is outraged at the wrong man, Mulwray, when he's also being blamed by the men in the orange groves for poisoning their wells, when it's Cross. And Jake is consistently confused always throughout the film, and he accuses Evelyn of keeping his husband's girlfriend tied up. He even tells her, "It's not what it looks like, Mrs. Mulwray." And, of course, at the end, how it looks with Evelyn with the gun, how she has become just what Cross had been telling Jake about in their first scene together, and how it looks to other people, as she's this crazy, disturbed woman. Disturbed is the word that Cross used. But that's really not what it looks like. She's not the evil one. And, of course, Escobar accusing Jake of crimes like extortion at Ida Sessions' house. He also has the wrong idea, too, but I'd say even more so than Jake did.
Yeah.
So one thing that I didn't quite understand, as I said, this film has confused me. I feel much better about it on my fourth watch.
I think you understand this film a lot more than you're letting on, Elizabeth, okay?
Here's what happens. It's interesting. I had a similar thing happen to me to when I watched Tenet the second and then third time. I thought I understood Chinatown by the rewatch, this time being my third time watching it. I thought I understood it more, And then by the fourth time, which I watched last week, I found myself even more confused than the third time because I'm going through and looking at the smallest details. Now, I understand the corruption and what the film is saying at large, but some of the smaller details I'm confused about. One of them being, just to clarify, when Evelyn was in Mexico and hadn't seen Catherine for a while, was Hollis taking care of her during that time?
Boy, that's a question that never would have occurred to me.
Oh, see, this is what I'm talking about.
It's a good question.
Thank you. See, I focus on these little things that mess up my seeing of the film as a whole.
No, but that's an element of the narrative that you're really focusing on. You're focusing on the small details of the narrative, and that's really impressive. And I'd seen the film so many times, but I barely remember her reflections on a trip to Mexico. Isn't that funny?
Well, she had said that she went to Mexico and how it had been a while without seeing Catherine, and she said, I didn't want to see her then, but I want to be with her now more than anything. Something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And if Hollis had come to help her, I'm wondering how much time he had with Catherine separately without Evelyn, because it seems like Hollis Mulwray became like the father to Catherine because she doesn't quite know who her real father is. So that's been something I've seen during my 2 rewatches this time around preparing for this episode that I have not solved.
Well, this is going to keep me awake for many days now because now I'm going to have to watch it again and pay more attention to that part. But I think that's the great thing about truly memorable films. There's some element of mystery that keeps us guessing or keep us wanting to try to figure the narrative out, and that's a new element to it that I hadn't thought of.
In the final scene, Jake tells Escobar, "You don't know what's going on here, I'm telling you." Why do you think that Escobar didn't even entertain Jake's explanation of the situation?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that at that moment, or by that time, Escobar is aware of the fact that Noah Cross is pulling the strings, and he can't afford to alienate or cross Noah Cross. Now he realizes who's really behind this, and he's not going to do anything because Cross is too powerful. As Evelyn says, he owns the police. And that's why he's not going to be following up on what Jake is talking about. And it's just cheaper to let Jake go than to pursue any of those charges or the evidence that Jake has amassed that would affect and impact Noah Cross.
That's something I hadn't caught before in my rewatches. I wasn't sure if he just, because he owned the police, that was the main reason he would step back, or if he just completely did not see what Jake was telling him.
I think that Lou Escobar didn't want to see. I mean, he probably saw it, or he just didn't want to see. He couldn't afford. He had just been promoted, or he talked about being promoted when he talked to Jake at the reservoir. But he didn't, at that point, he didn't want to see. He was almost being paid not to see what was really going on because Noah Cross was involved.
Yeah, that's very, very well said. And another recurring part, as I mentioned, show don't tell is very important for this film, which is a good mark of any film: more show, less tell. And we see Jake watching Mulwray walk around. We see a headline, which is a blink or you miss it moment: Department of Water and Power blows fuse headline, which is very important to the film because that's the story about Mulwray possibly cheating, having a love nest, and Jake's work now getting publicity. Also, Evelyn stuttering her nervousness about the mention of her father. And when Evelyn was talking about how Mulwray and Cross's falling out led to them never speaking again, Jake said, "You sure about that?" She didn't know they were still in contact, even though Cross says so. He says so later in the film to Jake, and of course we see the pictures towards the beginning of the film with Walsh's findings, which were dismissed by Jake at the time, but man, did that become incredibly important for this case. What does that tell us about Mulwray and Cross, and about how Evelyn wasn't aware of their continued relationship that's seemingly there.
So we're talking about Evelyn's husband and his business relationship with Noah Cross?
Yes, because it seemed like from what she knew that they had a falling out years ago over the water department about
Right.
Mulwray wanted the people to own the water to make it public, but that falling out caused them to never speak again. At least that's what Evelyn was saying. But that's not the case, because we saw them talking 5 days prior to when Jake and Cross finally had their first conversation. So what does that tell us about Mulwray and his relationship with Cross? Is there something there that is being suggested that the audience should know?
Until now, Elizabeth, no one has questioned that incongruity.
Oh.
You're right. Why is he meeting with Noah Cross? I don't know what exactly they were talking about. If I remember correctly, Gittes indicates to Noah Cross that Cross had met with Mulwray recently.
Right.
But we aren't really told what that all was about.
Yes.
So the question was, was Mulwray not as clean as he appeared? Was he in deeper with Cross than we realized?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, that's a very unfair theory on my part. The thing that I would assume immediately was that Mulwray was sensing more opposition from Cross on some of the policies he wanted to approve at the Department of Water and Power, because he was opposing a certain dam project and Cross was wanting it, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that was his whole plan, was to get this passed. And he had the whole public on his side, but they didn't understand what they would be voting yes for. Mulwray was kind of trying to protect everyone by saying, no, we're not going to build this dam.
And clearly Cross was not going to have any of that. He was not about to let Mulwray stand in his way.
Mm-mm. So yeah, there seems to be something deeper. I'm curious if they have never not stopped talking. They've always continued talking to one another, and it was just under the radar to Evelyn. But even I question where Evelyn, I know this was a question that Jake poses to Evelyn, but he asks her, where were you when Mulwray was killed? And she didn't say. I don't think we fully got an answer, but if he was killed in the pond of their home, I assume Evelyn hasn't seen her father. Where could she have been at that time?
Good question. I wish I had answers to these brilliant questions.
This is what happens when I watch Nolan films. I dive too deep and I have questions that are seemingly that I can't find answers for. So.
No, but they're troubling questions. They're troubling questions, and
yes,
the questions you raise kind of point to our feeling of Evelyn Mulwray as a woman of intrigue, a woman who's harboring secrets, which of course is so important in films of this nature. You need a character like that.
Yes, and of course there's a lot of foreshadowing in the film.
Yes,
I like
using the term nosy. There's a duality to that when Polanski, he makes his cameo as nosy fellas talking about Jake, and how his nose gets cut.
Yes.
And of course the salt water bad for glass.
Mm-hmm.
That is brilliant.
And another one, if I'm competing with you here, but another one is where Evelyn is behind the steering wheel of a car and Jake is confronting her after he sees her with the woman. He doesn't realize it's her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She's crying and she bangs up against the car horn and briefly sets it off.
Yes. I just learned that this morning reading about the film. I didn't catch that while watching it.
That was a warning, or that was a foreshadowing of the tragedy to come.
Yes, that's another brilliant. And again, another one being the focus on Evelyn's eye, the flaw in the iris.
And speaking of that scene, it's worth mentioning just a little bit of technical stuff here, because this was photographed obviously in color. It was Technicolor. It was the last year of the old dye transfer Technicolor process, which kind of like a silk screen process for film printing. And the following year, Technicolor sold its equipment to China. But Chinatown was among films that year, like The Godfather Part 2, that was released in this ravishing color process. And the cinematographer was John Alonzo, who praised working with Roman Polanski and felt that Polanski was taking a lot of risks in some of the cameras, because at some of Polanski's directions, in that scene where the iris is mentioned, is where it's the prelude to their lovemaking, of course, where Evelyn is taking care of Jake's nose injury. And it's going from a stable camera to a handheld camera, which was a daring thing to do because it's a very abrupt change for an audience to observe, even if you're not technically savvy. And Polanski does that a number of times in Chinatown, where the camera is very stationary, old school, and then suddenly there might be a handheld camera movement. And Alonzo was very uncomfortable by that, but then when he saw the results, he realized that it worked. I thought that was fascinating.
Did you notice the switch? Was that a clear shift for you?
In the sense that I'm very cinematography centered.
Oh, glitching.
But I felt it a natural progression. But I was aware of the shift, but felt it made sense.
Interesting, because to me it just seems seamless. I didn't notice it. Rewatching certain clips back to notice it, I can tell now, but it was so seamless and well done. It wasn't so shaky when they went handheld.
And Polanski would be pleased to hear you say that, because he once said in an interview that an audience shouldn't notice a beautiful camera movement.
Yes.
So
that was another, I mean, there's so many well done things about this film, and of course that is one of them. Now, speaking of jarring and noticing a shift, when Jake says, "Shut the F up," was that supposed to be jarring to audiences at the time?
It was jarring to me at the age of 14, even though I'd heard profanity in films. It certainly was a reminder that, hey, this is a 1970s film about the 1930s. We would not have heard Humphrey Bogart say that in 1950. So it was a little bit of a modern touch.
Yeah, I can't imagine Bogart saying that word.
And the thing is, they would have. I mean, obviously, if the censorship had not been in place, we would have had more of that.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I was confused about, just as clarification, is Yelburton under Cross's influence?
So I want to make sure. So Yelburton was the John Hillerman character. John Hillerman, wonderful character actor who had appeared in several Peter Bogdanovich films. He was in Last Picture Show and What's Up, Doc? And he had a great part as twin brothers in Paper Moon. But the idea was, yes, he plays the sheriff. And
I didn't realize that till now.
And the revenue or the bootlegger. And it suggested that Yelburton is under Cross's control. That he's not an ally of Mulwray.
Right. Okay, yeah, that's what I figured. But again, there's a lot of show don't tell going on that I needed to clarify, because that, again, I'm looking at it too closely and I'm getting confused.
But that's healthy to be studying.
Yes. So we've referred to the ending a few times now and how different it was from the screenplay to the film that we see today. Why does Jake tell everyone to meet him in Chinatown, a place of haunting memories for him?
That's a very good question. The simplest and least academic and intellectual response I can give you is that Polanski and others said, we need a scene in Chinatown. We need an excuse for them to meet in Chinatown. I would think he would have picked someplace else, but they needed a scene.
Okay. I didn't think it would be only that. I guess I just thought there must have been some deeper meaning to it. I mean, it makes sense for the last scene to be filmed in Chinatown, but I also understand how just alluding to it and what that represents.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to take away from that analysis at all, because it's supposed to represent things that are very tragic. And a police killing in Chinatown is not going to get as noticed as a police killing in Beverly Hills, that sort of thing. What it's supposed to symbolize, Chinatown.
And
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I wanted to reference something what I thought was absolutely fascinating. I get so annoyed when people in the modern age, when they're looking back at something from 50 years ago, we're doing it from a very modern perspective where we can look back and we can see things that are offensive to us today, but weren't offensive to people back at the time. That stuff drives me bonkers, as you may know, which is why I find fascinating. There was a book written only 4 years after Chinatown came out. It was by Eugene Franklin Wong. It was called On Visual Media Racism, Asians in the American Motion Picture. And it was published by the University of Denver, 1978, just 4 years later. And he was critical of the Chinese characters in the film. He didn't like the fact that they were speaking pidgin English, like Miss Mulwray not here, a saltwater bad for glass. Because he said by that time, there were already first generation American Chinese in Los Angeles who were speaking fluent Chinese. And I just thought that was fascinating. That was a relatively contemporary criticism of the film back in the late 70s. I just wanted to put that out there.
I did wonder about that, why broken English was how they were speaking. But that actor, the main, I forget his exact title, the one who answers the door, he's been in a lot of projects. He's been in a lot of films. He does little cameos. I've seen him on television.
Yes. You're speaking, I think you're referring to James Hong, who played her butler. James Hong.
Butler, yes. I thought that was his name, but I didn't want to be, in case I was incorrect, I didn't want to speak out of turn. So,
of course.
James Hong.
Yes. We have been alluding to the deeper meaning of the film of Chinatown, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that ending of the film and what the film represents in terms of corruption and greed.
Only that the message of the film that Tom Anderson was critical about in his film Los Angeles Plays Itself. I mean, the message is the system is too powerful to fight. The system is too powerful to triumph over, and the rich control society, and they will walk away unscathed from criminal acts. I mean, I think we all feel that from time to time. I like a little more optimism occasionally in my thrillers, but that's Polanski. This is a man who had seen way too much in too short a time, and also, we had indicated earlier, it's a theme common from some films of this new Hollywood era. A lot of bleak themes in the early 1970s, although 21st century is not alien to those themes by any stretch of the imagination either. There was only one more thing I wanted to share, which I thought was fascinating. You mentioned the profanity when Jake drops the F-bomb to remind us that we're watching a 1974 film. Another thing that is an example of that is at the very beginning, you have a retro opening. It's black and white. It's the original Paramount Pictures logo from the 30s. It doesn't say a Gulf and Western company, which the logo was saying by that time. Gulf and Western was the conglomerate that owned Paramount. It opens with an old-fashioned studio logo. The Wayne Fitzgerald titles are black and white, cursive letters, very old-fashioned looking. You have the Jerry Goldsmith orchestral score. And then we fade in on a black and white photo of two people having sex in public. They're clothed, but it's not the kind of image you would have seen in a 1940s film. So it slaps us back to reality. Like, don't be seduced by the nostalgia, by the retro look of this film. We're dealing with a modern take on that era.
Yeah, that end. Again, to the scene in the bedroom, there was nudity there too, something that could not be done under the censorship of a previous era in film, old Hollywood.
Precisely.
So, the final line of the film, "Forget it, Jake," It's Chinatown is one of the most famous film quotes of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you unpack its meaning?
Jake, it's not even worth it. It's Chinatown, Jake. You're not going to be able to win this one.
Mhm.
Forget it. You're up against insurmountable odds, Jake. It's Chinatown. And you, Jake, you've worked in Chinatown when you were a cop. You know what happens here. So don't even try, Jake.
Yeah. And you mentioned how, because of the times, it's such a downer, and that's very true to 70s endings. It's the more genuine ending. Whether it's a happier ending or not. If it's a happy ending, it's justified. So I can't imagine it ending up any other way. It should be a more grim ending.
Well, I don't want to depress our listeners, so I have to wind my comments down with some comic relief that just occurred to me on the spot.
Okay.
Great intellectual, artistic genius, Sylvester Stallone, when Rocky came out,
Oh,
he
you're
said,
glitching.
"Yeah, should have had a happy ending. The audiences were depressed when they came out of it." Aren't we glad he wasn't involved in the making of this?
I am so glad you said that, because I parallel that moment to something that this would be a tangent, but that line is so important, and yeah, it would be a full tangent if I go forward, but I'm just glad you said that.
No worries. No worries. But I'm so glad we're talking about it 50 years later. I knew we would.
Yes. And clearly you said you immediately knew it was a masterpiece, so that's amazing. I am surprised that you said, I believe you said Robert Towne wasn't crazy about the conversations they were having in the bedroom. I hope he wasn't talking about when he provides context for Jake's experiences in Chinatown, about how he was trying to keep someone from being hurt, and how he ended up making sure that she was. Evelyn asks, was there a woman involved? He says, of course. She asks dead, and the phone rings. Jake never answers.
He didn't get any further into the weeds on that, Robert Towne. I wished he had. He just alluded to some of that one line that Faye Dunaway said, but he didn't indicate which of his dialogue was retained in that scene and which wasn't.
I hope, because that moment is so important. It doesn't provide too much information, but it says a lot about Chinatown and what the film as a whole represents, and the situation, the case that we're dealing with in the film.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you think about Cross now having Catherine, do you think she'll be in the same danger Evelyn was in?
Let's just say I don't see it as a very healthy and happy for her.
Right. Yeah. You walk away from the film being concerned for Catherine, and that shot of him taking Catherine out of the car with his hands over her face has always stuck with me from the first time I saw the film.
You know, I'm more flashbacks, Elizabeth. Many people, or a number of people I've spoken to, recall that scene. Upon one of the other viewings I had back in the late 70s, my father, who saw it with me originally, who was a neuropsychologist, he was re-watching it at a cinema in the late 70s. And at the end, he said, you really got a sense of the tragedy that Noah Cross was experiencing, the trauma that he was experiencing, seeing his dead daughter in the car. You got a sense of the pain it was causing him. That's something that hadn't occurred to me.
Interesting.
Another man who was with me when I saw that screening in 1983 at the LA County Art Museum commented about that sequence where the daughter is like screaming, and then she's looking back at the dead Evelyn, and then she's looking away and looking back. He was commenting, "Oh boy, that Polanski, he's so macabre. He has to have her looking back at the dead body." It's so interesting, these different reactions people get in that to that sequence.
Yes, and the one you mentioned first is especially interesting. Now, you were glitching for a little bit, but from what you were saying, talking about how tragic it must have been for Cross to have
not
had Catherine.
Okay, that's interesting.
I can do another version of that.
Well, I heard most of it, but it sparks the question. So when Jake was first talking with Cross is saying how he worries for Evelyn and he doesn't want Jake to be taking her for a ride. and I question whether he genuinely cares for Evelyn. So, do you think that he genuinely does care for Evelyn, but also he genuinely cares for Catherine?
As much as I despise Noah Cross as a person, I would have to say yes. I do think
Wow.
he cares about those two women in his own repulsive way.
Wow. Okay. That's so. I actually, on my list of notes here, I have a connection that I was going to make. When you were watching Killers of the Flower Moon, a film that we have been talking about lately in our emails, when you saw Robert De Niro as William King Hale, were you reminded of Noah Cross?
Not explicitly, but now that you mention it, I can't believe that Scorsese didn't have Polanski's Chinatown in his sights when he was making Colors of the Flower Moon.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely have to believe that there are parallels,
Oh,
that
yeah.
it certainly served as an inspiration.
Oh, yes. And Cross's plot is to eventually make a town where he owns everything, just like Hale does in Killers of the Flower Moon. And they have a similar business-like, almost kind at times, demeanor that conceals their greed and true evil nature. The only times we really see Cross as evil, or really the most subtle signs of it, were when Jake tells him that it was 5 days since he last saw Mulwray, after Cross had said he doesn't remember the last time they spoke. And then you see the smile drain from Cross's face.
Yes.
And there's a line that Cross says later. The last scene one-on-one between Cross and Jake is, Cross says, most people never have to face the fact that at the right time, at the right place, they're capable of anything. That line is tremendous in itself. And then the image of him taking Catherine out of the car. So those were the only main, more clear, yet still subtle hints of evil that we see of Cross. And you could say the same about Hale in Killers of the Flower Moon. There are certain little parts that we do see his evil show, his greed, but it's mostly concealed under this more business-like, proper demeanor.
I mean, unfortunately, it's a timeless theme, tragically. It's just these people with tremendous affluence and power who want to be kings in their own communities or their own cities, their own states, you know.
Right.
Killers of the Flower Moon is an example, and of course, Chinatown as well.
Another connection that I came up with yesterday, contrasting, it might be a contrasting comparison. I'm not sure what to fully make of it. I haven't fully developed this yet. It's a film that we have discussed in the past, and I know you're not so crazy about.
Uh-oh.
So the topic being crimes that serve as the main plot or focus of the film, and the point of the film isn't the solved crime. Crimes that are presented as the main focus plot of the film but eventually drift away. In Chinatown, Jake solves the crime, but it doesn't matter by the end. In Antonioni's La Ventura, the point of the film drifts from the murder to a different angle where we never learn who and what happened to the victim.
No, I love La Ventura. I want to make sure our listeners know that. I'm a fan of that film.
Oh, yeah.
I know you said you liked it, but you didn't. It drove you crazy that you didn't find out who the killer was.
When I was a youngin' seeing it for the first time, and then I saw it again, and I accepted Antonioni's mind game.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that second part. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. But yeah, that's a parallel comparison that I noticed. I wasn't sure if you noticed it as well.
But you're right. It doesn't matter. Yeah, he does his job, but in the end, it's going to be, the truth is going to be buried.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on to the casting and characters, I did want to mention that Jack Nicholson once said to the public that he disliked the ending as well.
Interesting. Jack Nicholson said that.
Yes, apparently. Of course, he's someone that, I mean, when I was much younger, trying to learn as much as I could about him, just as being such a fan of him, he never did interviews, so it was always hard to find certain things that he said that I would read about, or really any interviews of him to watch. So I don't know where he said that and when he said that, but apparently he did. So
the only other thing I recall when he was talking about the film was that in the scene where he is talking to John Huston's Noah Cross, and the subject of Noah Cross's daughter comes up. Nicholson felt it was powerful as an actor because at the time he was involved with John Huston's daughter, Angelica.
Yes. Oh, I love this story.
So he was able to draw on those emotions in the scenes with the real John Huston. I thought that was amazing.
Well, what I had learned about it, which is really very funny, is the one day that Angelica visited the set was during that first scene between Jake and Cross. And according to IMDb, because the relationship had just started with Angelica, this made his scenes with her father, John Huston, rather uncomfortable, especially as the only time Angelica was on set was the day they were filming the scene where Noah Cross interrogates Nicholson's character with, "Mr. Gittes, do you sleep with my daughter?"
That's priceless. That's
That's
priceless.
so
Funny. What made Jack Nicholson the perfect actor to play Jake Gittes?
Well, that's a source of controversy. A buddy of mine commented recently that he felt Nicholson didn't convey a noir-like character. He didn't think he was the right character or actor to play a noir-like character. I'm not sure I buy that. I think Nicholson had a balance of humor. He could balance humor and drama very effectively. And he could be funny, but he could also be very intense. And that's not an easy thing for an actor to balance with or to work with in a drama of this kind. I'm thinking aloud. That's not a very wise observation on my part, but
No, he's a very versatile actor. He's someone who can play the villain, he can play the hero, he can play anything, and he's phenomenal. He really is. And this character was a little bit more toned down than what we normally see with, outbursts or being driven mad, in the case of The Shining. But it was a great performance on his part. And I don't know if I could say he has had too many bad performances. He's always been great, even if the film is not so great. But yeah, I mean, I'm such a fan of him. I could be very biased, but I am shocked that there are people who think he may not have been cast perfectly in this.
I just couldn't imagine anyone else playing the part. However, we did dodge a bullet, as you may be aware. Originally being considered for the role of Evelyn Mulwray was Robert Evans's wife, Ali McGraw. But she was having an affair with Steve McQueen, and Rev Evans was so upset, he said, "Well, you're off the picture." So I guess we owe Steve McQueen some credit and thanks for distracting Ali McGraw from Chinatown.
Okay, well, I just learned about Ali McGraw's potential involvement with the film yesterday. I thought you had been referring to, when you used the word horrendous, that you were referring to Jane Fonda.
Oh, no, I wasn't. I mean, Jane Fonda, I think would have been also good in the film.
She would have. I agree.
Yeah.
She apparently turned the film down, which breaks my heart because of this time, of this era. My favorite actor is Jack Nicholson, and she's my favorite actress. So to have seen them work together in a film as masterful as this would have been a dream to me. So
Point well taken.
if I ever get to interview her, that's one of my questions.
Good.
The audience's first impression of Jake is that he is a good guy, as he tells Curly, a poor man, not to worry about his payment since he doesn't want to take his last dime. There are instances of Jake not being so upstanding, or people perceive him that way due to his job, in which Jake will be the first to defend. Is our first impression of Jake accurate, that he is a genuinely good guy?
Well, I think the initial impression we get of Jake is that he doesn't want to just take people's money. When, quote unquote, Mrs. Mulwray comes to visit him at his office, it turns out it's not the real Mrs. Mulwray, and she wants to hire him. He tries to talk her out of it, saying, look, it's better that you not know if your husband's having an affair. So he's not so eager to take people's money if their hearts are going to be broken. So that warms us up to him a little bit. And I think generally we get a sense that he's not doing it just for the money, that he's doing the best he can, and we side with him, I think.
And even Evelyn asks him, is this a business or an obsession with you? So, to your point that you just made, do you think that is this more than just a job for him? Is he just obsessed with?
Well, you have to be obsessed in that job. I mean, if you're going around tailing people, photographing them, getting pictures processed in the dark room, and pulling together reports, you have to be obsessed. You have to really, really be obsessed with the subjects and the kind of work that it entails. And you also have to be willing to be a little unethical at times if you're going to get the job done, as he has to be when he's climbing on rooftops to snap pictures of Mulwray and who he assumes to be Mulwray's mistress, but isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he's obsessed.
Do you think he believes what he's doing is an honest living, or that he is just telling himself this?
I think he's talked himself into believing it's an honest living. I mean, that scene in the barber shop where he gets into a screaming match with a guy who makes a crack about him peering through bedroom windows and so on. He's saying, look, this is my job. I mean, I'm not quoting directly, but, you know.
Why was the bandage on his face, this injury, so important to the character?
Well, I mean, the Freudians could read a lot into that. I mean, the knife as a phallic symbol, the nose injury as a castration. You know, you can write an entire term paper on what that symbolizes. But it takes a very confident actor to agree to that in a film. The fact that Nicholson had to play that part with either a bandage on his nose most of the time or stitches on his nose in a very unflattering way, not a lot of actors would have consented to that.
Oh, interesting.
And if anyone cares, Elliot Gould also had a bandage on his nose that same year in Robert Altman's California Split. But let's not go down that rabbit hole.
I knew you would bring that up. We have to talk about John Huston as Noah Cross. How was Huston not even nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his performance?
That's maddening. It makes absolutely no sense. If we can discuss Academy Award stupidity till the cows come home, but they're always quite clueless when it comes to ignoring a lot of really outstanding work. If I was directing Chinatown, I would have been terrified to direct John Huston. I mean, a man who's a very distinguished director, but he apparently was good at taking direction, and he was very fond of the picture. I remember seeing him on a talk show, around 1980, where he said it was an excellent picture. So it was certainly one of his best roles as an actor. And he was still able to do his directing work in addition to that.
Yes, and he had directed some of the most famous, brilliant noirs, one of them being The Maltese Falcon. So it makes for an interesting casting choice to have him as Noah Cross. And he even declined to direct this film. So
that's a fascinating tidbit. Because he would have been perfectly in line to direct, considering he was doing a lot of work at the studios at that time. But the 1940s was Huston's noir period, where Maltese Falcon and Across the Pacific and Key Largo and The Asphalt Jungle, these were all his great noirs, and then he shifted gears. But the film noir afforded Huston the chance to comment on social conditions, as it did other filmmakers and writers at the time. But he was an ideal casting choice for Chinatown.
And he was perfectly cast. I mean, he was perfectly cast, and I don't know if I've really seen him in any other films yet. I have seen The Maltese Falcon, which he directed, he's not in. And you just mentioned Key Largo. I forgot he directed Key Largo.
Yeah, he has a cameo in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre early on in that film. But he did like character parts and not many. Of course, he was in Orson Welles' The Other Side of the Wind that finally was finished in 2018. But Chinatown is his best, really. It's considered his best as an actor.
Why is it important for the character of Cross to consistently mispronounce Jake's last name? What does that say about him and their dynamic?
My only takeaway from that is his self-absorption. He's one of those people who has to constantly be reminded who somebody's first name is and how to pronounce it. He has his own set way of pronouncing things, and that's my only takeaway of that.
I thought there would be something deeper, but from what I read on IMDb, that Cross's mispronunciation of Gittes' last name wasn't in the script. John Huston just couldn't get it right, so Polanski had Nicholson add a line trying to correct him, and after that he just let it go.
That's great. But it works. It works.
It works, and I think self-absorption is the perfect way to describe it. You know, he doesn't really care, which is interesting because as a businessman, one of the big things is to always remember the person's name, get that name right, and he doesn't. He forgets it, and he gets it consistently wrong.
Exactly.
In your 1974 film Talkback, you talked about how films in the 70s were nearly not allowed to be in black and white. They had to be in color. I know we have talked a little bit about the incredible look of the film, but do you think Chinatown should have been in black and white?
I think ultimately making it in color was more daring because it's easy to go the black and white route when you're doing film noir. But Polanski, I mean, he's a master. He knows how to use color. He knows when to bring the lights down and introduce the shadows and when not to. And I think he knows that color can also be menacing and threatening when there's sunlight and when there's brightness. So I think color was okay here.
Yeah, I'm certainly glad they stick with color. And the look of the film, the color tones was really
Beautiful.
Stunning. And
it really bothers me and that it can't be replicated today.
Frustrating.
Said the same.
And your talkback, and now we cannot have those beautiful coloring in film. Such a shame.
It was all done in the laboratory process, and it enabled the colors to look richer, and also the film prints didn't fade as the other non-Technicolor prints did. They tried bringing it back in the late 90s for a while. It didn't go over, but at least we get to see it here.
It was a very competitive year at the Oscars in 1975, but in retrospect, since Chinatown earned only one Oscar, which categories do you think the film should have won for?
Well, I mean, I have nothing against The Godfather Part 2, but Chinatown, I think, was equally worthy of director and picture, and at least an act. I think I would have preferred Faye Dunaway for Best Actress, to be honest with you. And I think John Huston would have been a good choice as well. It also, I think, deserved an editing Oscar. I think Sam Osteen, who also edited Rosemary's Baby, he was one of the great film editors of the 1970s. He worked also with Mike Nichols.
Another frequent collaborator of Nicholson's, Mike Nichols.
Exactly.
Best film editing was nominated. Sam Osteen was nominated, but it lost to The Towering Inferno.
Okay, yeah, like, oh, jeez.
That was what I was referring to earlier.
That was the ugly child of the five children that year. You had Best Picture nominees were The Godfather Part 2, Chinatown, Lenny and the Conversation, and then The Towering Inferno. Obviously, A suitcase of money was dumped on somebody's table.
Well, that's another like foreshadowing occurrence of new Hollywood ending.
Like big
blockbusters coming in, and 1975, the year of Jaws coming out.
Yeah.
They have
The Towering Inferno in there with these incredible films. I don't know how it got in there. I don't understand.
It's one of those head scratchers.
Yes. And also how John Huston was snubbed. That is shocking. I mean, Nicholson was snubbed as supporting actor for being the villain of The Departed as well. So that's another shocking snub.
Yeah.
Do you think Chinatown still has the same effect on viewers 50 years later?
Well, not having seen it with an audience in many years, I would think that it would still hold people's attention. We've seen the poor man's Chinatown. We've seen films like L.A. Confidential, for example, which wants to be Chinatown but can't. I still think there would be enough here to capture people's attention and make it very compelling for them.
Yes, and it's a film that we're still talking about today, and I believe that the day this episode comes out is the exact anniversary of Chinatown. So
fantastic.
Yes,
it's a great film, and It's certainly one of Nicholson's best, even though he has plenty of great films. And there's so much. I'm going through my notes. There's so much that we could have talked about.
We covered a lot, Elizabeth,
We
so you should
did.
be very proud of yourself.
We did, and
I'm just so sad that the glitching affected this episode. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. It'll just be some editing stuff that has to be done. So sorry, but I'm honored to have been on the show.
Yes, I'm so grateful for you to come on again. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we finally did another episode.
And
You're welcome.
Not only does the day this episode comes out mark the 50th anniversary of Chinatown, but it also is the same day you are doing a Zoom lecture through New Plaza Cinema on the cinema of Billy Wilder.
So,
what about him are you most excited to discuss?
Well, the problem with Wilder is that there's so much there. It's so stressful having to reduce him to an hour and 20-minute lecture. I'm fortunate that a few weeks later, I'm doing a talk for the Smithsonian, which is 2 hours. So I can go through so much more. I just love the range of his work. I love the fact that he can do his brilliant and just the range there, the range.
Mm-hmm.
Most about him is the fact that here's a guy who could barely speak English when he got to the United States in the late 30s. And he is like one of the most American filmmakers with the slang, his understanding of this American society and customs. You'd swear he was born in the Bronx.
Yeah. I didn't even know that about Wilder, but I'm shocked that he was not born in the U.S. and he's not from here.
No, he was German, born in East Europe, and he grew up in Germany.
Ah, interesting. And the next day, you will be giving a lecture on Wilder's film Sunset Boulevard. Is this your favorite Wilder film?
It's certainly up there. My favorite is one that I'm discussing. This will be after the podcast. But at New Plaza Cinema, we're showing The Apartment this week. That is my personal favorite.
Yes.
But I do love Sunset Boulevard, which Joseph McBride says almost plays like a documentary about Hollywood. It rings true in many tragic ways.
Yeah, The Apartment ranks really high up on my list of Wilder films as well, and
glad to hear it.
It's my
Christmas film every year.
Yes, that's right.
So,
I love that film, and Sunset Boulevard is up there. It's close. Those two of my favorites of him for sure.
Yeah, great stuff.
Is there anything you could tell the audience about what's in the works in the next few months at New Plaza Cinema?
Oh gosh, we sort of New Plaza Cinema, we sort of plan things from month to month. The best thing is to just visit our website regularly, www.newplazacinema.org, because oftentimes we don't know what we're going to be showing until a few days before.
Wow.
And then the screenings and the lectures are usually planned about a month beforehand. So visit our website.
Yes, stay tuned, everyone. And everyone be sure to follow at new_plaza_cinema on Instagram and the New Plaza Cinema podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Is there a film recommendation, a line from a film, really anything you would like to conclude our episode with today?
A film recommendation. Boy, that's I'd say if you have access to the Criterion channel, there are so many great collections by major filmmakers there. You can't go wrong. Since we're discussing film noir, there are some terrific film noir up on the Criterion channel. I would recommend checking those out. My favorite is In a Lonely Place by Nicholas Ray, which Criterion currently has up there.
I saw that film about 2 years ago, and I need to rewatch it because I appreciated the second half much more than the first half.
That would be a 10-hour discussion. There's a lot to talk about there, Elizabeth.
I'm sure there is. I'll have to rewatch it. Another Bogart film.
Again, please go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you.
No, I was going to thank you. Thank you again so much for joining me. I love talking film with you, whether it be on a podcast, a phone call, email, and I really enjoyed our conversation today. I'm just so sad that the glitching got interfered a little bit, so I hope the audience will understand that, glitching just happens sometimes. So
technology hates us. That's my mantra.
Yes.
But
yes,
I love this podcast, and I can't wait till we talk again.
Yes, I'm already looking forward to it. Thank you again, and thank you all for listening. And Max, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful episode.
Thank you. And forget it, Elizabeth. It's Chinatown.
I should have ended it that way. That's so... Thank you for that.
Be well.
That's the best outro to an episode ever. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Again.
Bye, everyone. Special thanks to Max Alvarez, Christina Santiago, Dr. Jillian Smith, and Caitlin Fitzpatrick. This episode was recorded on June 6th, 2024.